You're thinking about an old friend you haven't spoken to in years. The memory surfaces unbidden, complete with the sound of their laughter, the way they used to gesture when telling stories. You haven't thought about them in months, maybe longer, then your phone vibrates, a text message from them. "Hey, I was just thinking about you." Your breath catches, the hair on your arms rises. For a moment, the rational world with its neat categories and cause and defect chains seems to shimmer and blur at the edges. What are the odds? What does it mean? You dismiss it, of course. Coincidence, random chance. The universe is vast and probability is strange, and surely this means nothing at all. But something in you knows differently, something deeper, because this isn't the first time. There was the book that fell off the shelf at the exact moment you were wrestling with a question it answered. The stranger who said precisely what you needed to hear. The job posting that appeared the day you decided to make a change. The dream that warned you, prepared you, showed you something you had no logical way of knowing. We've learned to silence this knowing. We've been taught that meaning is something we impose on a random universe, that coincidences are merely probability playing tricks on our pattern, seeking minds. But what if we've had it backwards? What if these moments when the outer world mirrors your inner state aren't meaningless accidents, but the universe's native language? What if reality itself has been trying to speak to you all along? It was a bittersweet realization, one that would, when we sense that our lives are following a script we didn't write. You make your choices, pursue your goals, follow the reasonable path. And yet something feels orchestrated, guided, as if invisible hands are arranging the pieces of your existence according to some hidden pattern you can't quite see. Most people dismiss these feelings. We live in an age that worships rational explanation, that reduces mystery to mechanism, that teaches us to trust only what can be measured, predicted, controlled. Coincidence is written off as statistical inevitability, that chance encounter that changed your life's direction. Random, the book that appeared at the perfect moment, confirmation bias, the dream that came true, your mind playing tricks, finding patterns where none exist. But here's what haunts us. The dismissal never quite works. You can recite the statistics, invoke the law of large numbers, explain away each individual incident, and still that feeling persists. That reality is more responsive, more alive, more meaningful than the mechanical universe we've been sold. The coincidences keep coming, and they come weighted with a significance that mere probability cannot explain. Consider Sarah, a woman who spent 15 years building a career she didn't love because it was practical, secure, what her parents wanted. She told herself she was content, that passion was overrated, that security mattered most. Then her company announced layoffs. As she cleaned out her desk, a business card fell from behind her drawer, a card from a woman she'd met at a conference 5 years earlier. Someone who ran a nonprofit Sarah had been fascinated by but never contacted. The card had been lost, forgotten, trapped, until that precise moment when it was needed. Sarah called the number, the woman remembered her, and yes, they were hiring. The job paid less but offered exactly what Sarah had been secretly yearning for without quite admitting it to herself. Was this chance, or was this her life trying to correct its course, using the only language available to a universe that cannot speak in words? Or think about Marcus, who kept dating the same type of person over and over, emotionally unavailable, critical, ultimately unfulfilling relationships that echoed the patterns of his childhood. He knew this intellectually. He'd read the books, done the therapy, understood the psychology, but knowing didn't seem to help. Then, 3 times in 1 week, he encountered the same message in different forms. A podcast discussing attachment patterns, a friend casually mentioning their own healing journey, and a movie scene that made him weep with recognition. 3 different sources, the same message, arriving in a concentrated burst when he was finally, secretly ready to hear it. Coincidence, theorists would say these incidents mean nothing. That Sarah's card falling at that moment was random physics. That Marcus's triple encounter was selective attention. Of course, he noticed those messages when that topic was on his mind. The explanations are logical, tidy, complete. They explain everything except the most important thing: why it feels so profound, why it carries such weight, why it seems to arrive exactly when needed with a precision that mocks probability. We've become experts at explaining away the extraordinary. We've learned to apologize for the sense that our lives contain meaning beyond material cause and effect. We treat synchronicity, those meaningful coincidences that seem to speak directly to our soul's journey, as embarrassing superstition, evidence of fuzzy thinking, the territory of the credulous and naive. But what if this materialist dismissal is itself a defense mechanism? What if we've become so uncomfortable with mystery, so threatened by the possibility that reality is more alive and aware than dead matter moving through empty space, that we've trained ourselves to ignore the universe's most intimate communications? Jung noticed something that modern psychology has struggled to accommodate: that the psyche and the world are not as separate as we pretend, that there are moments when the boundary between inner and outer dissolves, when your psychological state manifests in the external world with an elegance and timing that suggests something more than coincidence is at work. He called this synchronicity, and he considered it one of his most important and most misunderstood discoveries. The Western mind, trained in Cartesian dualism, cannot accept this. We've built our entire world, on the assumption that mind and matter are fundamentally separate, that consciousness is locked inside the skull, that the world outside is dead, mechanical, indifferent. To admit that reality might be responsive to our inner states, that meaning might be woven into the fabric of existence itself, feels dangerous, irrational, a step back toward the superstitious, thinking we've worked so hard to transcend. But what if it's the opposite? What if this rigid separation, this insistence that coincidences must be meaningless, is actually limiting our ability to navigate our lives with wisdom and grace? What if synchronicity is not a violation of natural law, but a fundamental feature of a reality far stranger and more meaningful than our current paradigm allows? Carl Jung encountered synchronicity not as abstract theory, but as lived experience that demanded explanation. He watched meaningful coincidences cluster around his patients at critical moments in their psychological development. A woman dreaming of a golden scarab beetle at the very moment a rare rose chafer, the closest thing to a scarab in Switzerland, tapped against his consulting room window. A man wrestling with defenses against change having his car break down in 3 symbolically significant ways in a single week. Patients encountering exactly the book, person, or situation they needed precisely when their psyche was ready to transform. For years, Jung tried to dismiss these occurrences as random. He was, after all, a scientist, trained in empirical method, expected to maintain professional skepticism. But the coincidences persisted with a pattern that mocked probability. They clustered around psychological turning points. They carried symbolic meanings that connected inner state to outer event with uncanny precision. They felt purposeful in a way that random chance never does. Jung eventually proposed something radical: that causality, the idea that everything happens because something else caused it, might not be the only organizing principle of reality. He suggested a second principle he called synchronicity, and a causal connecting principle, where events are related not because one caused the other, but because they share meaning. They belong together not through mechanical causation, but through significance, resonance, pattern. Think about what this means. In the causal world, your thoughts exist only inside your head. They cannot affect the world except through your physical actions. Your inner psychological state and the events happening around you are completely separate domains, connected only by the narrow bridge of your behavior. But Jung observed something different. Moments when the psyche's condition seems to manifest in the world, when inner transformation coincides with outer events in ways that seem orchestrated for maximum impact on your mental journey. This isn't magic or mysticism, though it sounds like both. Jung grounded synchronicity in his larger understanding of the psyche. He saw consciousness not as limited to individual brains, but as something more vast, connected at its depths to what he called the collective unconscious, a psychic substrate shared by all humanity, perhaps by all reality. In this view, you are not a separate consciousness sealed inside a meatmachine, observing an indifferent universe from behind your eyes. You are consciousness localized, focused, individualized, but still fundamentally connected to the larger field from which you emerged. When you're living unconsciously, mechanically, identified with your persona and cut off from the deeper layers of psyche, synchronicities are rare or unnoticed. You move through the world in a kind of sleep, following scripts written by others, pursuing goals that aren't really yours, wearing masks that hide even from yourself who you actually are. In this state, reality remains opaque, mechanical, apparently random. But when you begin the work of individuation, Jung's term for the process of becoming who you actually are, something shifts. As you start to engage honestly with your shadow, to question your persona, to dialogue with the unconscious through dreams and active imagination, to pursue your own unique path rather than the collective script, synchronicities multiply. It's as if reality itself becomes more responsive, more alive, more communicative the more conscious you become. Jung understood this as the psyche reaching toward wholeness using every tool available, including the external world. The unconscious, he observed, is not limited by our rational categories. It thinks in symbols, speaks in images, and somehow, through mechanisms we don't fully understand, can arrange circumstances in the outer world to deliver precisely the message, encounter, or challenge needed for your development at exactly the right moment. This is why synchronicities often feel numinous, charged with meaning beyond the rational. You're not just witnessing a coincidence. You're receiving a communication from the depths of your own psyche, delivered through the world itself. The book that falls open to the perfect page, the stranger who appears with precisely the wisdom you need, the obstacle that forces you toward a path you'd been avoiding, these aren't random. They're your deeper self, working in concert with a reality more mysterious than mechanism, guiding you toward wholeness. But here's what's crucial. Synchronicity isn't about external forces controlling your life or removing your agency. It's about the universe, or psyche, or reality. The terminology doesn't matter becoming responsive when you become conscious. When you're genuinely engaged in the work of becoming yourself, when you're asking real questions and taking authentic steps toward individuation, reality seems to meet you halfway. Doors open, resources appear, the right people arrive. Not because you've mastered manifestation or positive thinking, but because you've aligned yourself with the deeper currents of your own becoming. Jung called individuation the loneliest journey because no one can walk it for you, and the path is uniquely yours. But synchronicity reveals that you're not alone in the way we usually think of loneliness. You're in conversation with something larger. Call it the self with a capital S, the totality of who you are, including unconscious depths, or call it the soul, or the universe's organizing intelligence. The terminology is less important than the recognition that you're held, guided, spoken to through the language of meaningful coincidence. The shadow work that individuation requires, confronting the parts of yourself you've disowned, integrating what you've rejected, accepting what you've denied, is difficult enough when you think you're doing it alone, but synchronicity suggests you're not alone. Your psyche, in its drive toward wholeness, is actively working to bring you what you need, the challenge that will break your defenses, the grace that will sustain you through darkness, the mirror that will show you what you can't yet see in yourself. This is why people often report increased synchronicities during times of crisis, transition, or profound questioning. When life breaks open, when the old structures collapse, when you can no longer maintain the persona that's been running your life, the psyche becomes urgently communicative. It uses everything available: dreams, bodily symptoms, relationships, and yes, meaningful coincidences, to guide you through the darkness toward a more authentic way of being. Jung spent decades exploring how the unconscious communicates. He found that it speaks symbolically, metaphorically, through images and events that carry multiple layers of meaning. A synchronistic event is like a waking dream, where the external world temporarily becomes the stage for your psyche's symbolic language. The meaning isn't arbitrary or magical. It's specific to your psychological condition, your developmental needs, your soul's particular journey toward wholeness. The implications of synchronicity extend far beyond psychology into fundamental questions about the nature of reality itself. If meaningful coincidences are real, if events can be connected through significance rather than causation alone, then the universe we inhabit is far stranger than the mechanistic model that's dominated Western thought since the Enlightenment. Descartes split reality into two separate substances, mind and matter, res cogitans and res extensa. This dualism created a philosophical problem we've been wrestling with ever since. How can consciousness, which seems so different from matter, emerge from or interact with a purely physical world? How can subjective experience arise from objective mechanism? The mind-body problem, as it's called, remains unsolved precisely because the initial premise, that mind and matter are fundamentally different kinds of substance, may be wrong. Synchronicity suggests a different ontology. What if reality isn't divided into separate substances, but is fundamentally one thing? Call it psyche, or consciousness, or experience manifesting in different modes. In this view, the distinction between inner and outer, subjective and objective, mental and physical, is less absolute than we've assumed. They're different aspects or perspectives on a unified reality that's more like mind than like matter, or perhaps transcends both categories entirely. This isn't New Age fantasy. It echoes some of the deepest insights of philosophy. Schopenhauer proposed that the world we experience is representation, appearance, while the thing in itself is will, a blind striving force that manifests in all things. You experience this will directly in yourself as your own urge to exist, to act, to become, and indirectly in the world as the same force expressing through different forms. Subject and object, inner and outer, are two sides of one reality. Nietzsche built on this, rejecting the idea of a stable, separate self observing an external world. Instead, he saw consciousness as interpretation, as creative engagement, as will to power expressing through different perspectives. In this view, you're not passively receiving an objective reality. You're actively participating in its creation through how you interpret, value, and engage with your experience. Eastern philosophy has long rejected the subject-object dualism that Western thought takes for granted. In Buddhist understanding, the sense of a separate self perceiving an external world is itself illusion, avidya, ignorance of the fundamental interdependence and emptiness of all phenomena. What we call synchronicity might be moments when this interdependence becomes briefly visible, when the usually hidden connections between self and world, consciousness and matter, become manifest. Quantum physics has inadvertently supported these philosophical intuitions. The observer effect demonstrates that consciousness and measurement affect reality at the quantum level. Entanglement shows that particles remain mysteriously connected across space. The universe revealed by quantum mechanics is far weirder than the clockwork mechanism Newton envisioned, participatory rather than merely observational, probabilistic rather than deterministic, interconnected in ways that violate our common sense categories of space, time, and causation. None of this proves synchronicity in a scientific sense, but it opens conceptual space for it. If reality at the quantum level is already strange, interconnected, and responsive to observation, perhaps consciousness and world are more intimately related than classical physics assumed. Perhaps meaningful coincidences are glimpses into the deeper interconnection that's always present but usually invisible to our ordinary awareness. Kierkegaard's concept of subjective truth becomes relevant here. He argued that the most important truths about how to live, what matters, who you are, cannot be approached objectively. They require subjective engagement, personal choice, a leap beyond what can be rationally proved. Synchronicity operates in this domain of subjective truth. You cannot prove that a coincidence is meaningful. You can only recognize it as meaningful through direct experience. The significance is real without being objective, true without being provable. This is why skeptics and believers talk past each other on this topic. The skeptic demands objective proof, causal mechanisms, repeatable experiments. But synchronicity, if real, operates at the boundary between subjective and objective, in a domain where meaning and matter intersect in ways that resist standard scientific methods. It's not that synchronicity is irrational, but that it may require a different kind of rationality, one that honors both subjective experience and objective inquiry without reducing either to the other. Heidegger's notion of thrownness captures something essential about the human condition that synchronicity addresses. We find ourselves thrown into existence, into a particular time, place, body, situation we didn't choose. We navigate circumstances we didn't create toward a future we can't fully predict. In this condition of radical contingency, synchronicity offers something precious, hints that the randomness isn't total, that there's meaning woven into the fabric of existence, that the universe that threw us into being hasn't abandoned us to pure chaos. But this raises uncomfortable questions. If synchronicities guide us, who or what is doing the guiding? Jung's answer: the self, the psyche as center and totality, the archetype of wholeness, is elegant but mysterious. Is the self purely psychological, or does it somehow participate in or even organize reality beyond the individual psyche? Jung sometimes suggested that archetypes exist not just in minds, but in the world itself, as organizing principles of reality. Synchronicity implies that psyche and world share a common ground, that meaning is woven into existence, not merely imposed upon it by human minds. This touches on perhaps the deepest philosophical question: is reality fundamentally meaningful, or is meaning something consciousness creates in an indifferent universe? The dominant scientific world. You opts for the latter, where meaning, making creatures in a meaningless cosmos, finding patterns and purpose to stave off existential terror. But synchronicity whispers a different possibility. That meaning is discovered, not invented, that reality itself has intentionality, purpose, direction toward wholeness and integration. You cannot prove this philosophically, any more than you can prove love is real to someone who's never felt it. But you can recognize it when it appears in your life, when circumstances align with impossible precision, when the world delivers exactly what your soul needs exactly when you're ready to receive it, when external events mirror internal states with such elegance that coincidence becomes an insufficient explanation. So, how do you actually work with synchronicity? How do you distinguish meaningful coincidence from random chance, genuine guidance from wishful thinking, and perhaps most importantly, how do you cultivate the kind of consciousness that allows synchronicity to operate in your life? The first step is recognition. You must begin to notice. Most of us move through life in a state of semi-consciousness, lost in thought, replaying the past or rehearsing the future, barely present to what's actually happening. In this state, synchronicities pass unrecognized. The universe speaks, but you're not listening. Practice presence. When something strikes you as odd, meaningful, strangely timed, don't immediately dismiss it. Pause. Consider, what might this be pointing toward? Keep a synchronicity journal. When something happens that feels meaningful, a repeated symbol, an unexpected encounter, a coincidental timing, write it down. Note your psychological state at the time. What were you working on internally? What questions were you holding? What transitions were you navigating? Over time, patterns emerge. You begin to see how synchronicities cluster around certain themes, how they tend to appear when you're at choice points or break through moments, how they often carry messages your conscious mind hasn't yet grasped. But here's the crucial discernment. Not every coincidence is synchronistic. The universe isn't a cosmic vending machine dispensing signs on demand. True synchronicity has certain characteristics. It feels numinous, charged with significance. It arrives at psychologically relevant moments. It carries meaning specific to your mental needs. It often challenges you or calls you forward rather than merely confirming what you already think. And it resists being manufactured. You cannot force synchronicity through magical thinking or manifestation techniques. This last point is vital. The New Age has often corrupted the concept of synchronicity into something like cosmic wish fulfillment. Think the right thoughts, maintain positive vibrations, and the universe will deliver what you want. This is not synchronicity. It's spiritual materialism, ego dressed in mystical language. True synchronicity serves individuation, not ego gratification. It brings what you need, which is often quite different from what you want. You might notice that synchronicities increase when you're doing genuine psychological work, facing your shadow honestly, questioning your persona, engaging with dreams, making conscious what was unconscious. This is because synchronicity serves the self's drive toward wholeness, not the ego's desire for comfort and control. When you align yourself with the individuation process, reality becomes more responsive. When you're lost in ego inflation or defensive denial, synchronicities fade or you fail to recognize them. This shows up in your life as increased flow. Doors open, resources appear, the right people cross your path. Not because you've mastered some secret technique, but because you've stopped fighting your own becoming. You've begun to cooperate with the deeper intelligence that's always been trying to guide you toward your authentic self. The obstacles you encounter are also synchronistic. that repeated pattern in relationships that keeps showing up until you finally address the underlying wound. The health crisis that forces you to slow down and reassess your priorities. The career setback that redirects you toward a more authentic path. These aren't punishments or random bad luck. They're your psyche, in collaboration with reality, presenting what needs to be addressed, healed, integrated. But resistance is normal. When a synchronicity points toward change, growth, the death of an old identity, part of you will resist. You'll rationalize the coincidence away. You'll acknowledge it intellectually while ignoring it practically. You'll dismiss it as wishful thinking precisely when it's most true. This resistance is itself valuable information. It shows you where your defenses are strongest, where the work most needs to happen. The first step is recognizing that you're being guided, even through what appears as obstacle or crisis. The second is cultivating the quality of attention that allows you to receive the guidance. This means developing what might be called synchronistic consciousness, a way of being in the world that's alert to meaning without imposing it, open to signs without becoming superstitious, receptive without being passive. When you begin to see your life this way, a subtle shift occurs. You feel less alone, less random, less buffeted by blind chance. Not because you've gained control. Synchronicity isn't about control, but because you've recognized that you're held within a meaningful order, that your life is in conversation with something larger, that the universe is less indifferent than it appeared. This doesn't mean everything becomes easy or that pain disappears. The individuation journey that synchronicity serves includes darkness, dissolution, the death of false selves. But it means the suffering is no longer meaningless. It's purposeful, transformative, part of a larger pattern of becoming. And at critical moments, you receive confirmation through meaningful coincidences that could not have been planned, that you're on your path, that your struggle serves your growth, that the universe recognizes your efforts toward consciousness. Something fundamental shifts when you begin to live synchronistically. The world that once seemed mechanical, random, indifferent reveals itself as alive, responsive, meaningful. Not in a naive way where everything means something and the universe exists to serve your ego, but in a deeper sense. Reality itself participates in your becoming. You start to trust differently, not the naive trust that everything will work out according to your preferences, but trust in the process itself. When synchronicities appear, you recognize them as confirmations that you're aligned with something deeper than ego. When they are absent, you understand you may have drifted into unconsciousness, lost connection with your authentic path, allowed persona to override self. The contrast is striking. Before synchronistic awareness, you were either trying to control everything through willpower and planning, or you felt like a passive victim of circumstances. Now you discover a third way, active receptivity. You engage fully with your life while remaining open to guidance. You make choices and take action while staying alert to signs that you're on or off course. You hold your plans lightly, willing to adjust when reality offers a better path. Relationships transform. You notice that certain people appear repeatedly when you're working on specific psychological material. The friend who calls exactly when you need perspective. The stranger who offers a comment that unlocks something you've been wrestling with. The teacher who appears when the student is ready. You begin to see other people not just as separate individuals, but as part of the larger pattern, sometimes serving as messengers, mirrors, or catalysts for your growth. Your relationship with time changes too, linear time. The relentless march from past through present to future remains, but you become aware of kairos, qualitative time, the right moment. Synchronicities often involve kairos, things happening at precisely the right psychological moment, rather than according to any mechanical schedule. You develop a sense for timing, for when to act and when to wait, not through strategic calculation, but through attunement to the larger rhythms of your unfolding. There's a paradox here that must be held carefully. You're being guided, but you're not controlled. You have agency, but you're not alone. The path is yours, but it's also being revealed to you. Synchronicity operates at the intersection of will and surrender, effort and grace, individual choice and collective pattern. To live synchronistically is to navigate this paradox without collapsing it into either determinism or pure randomness. This is what Jung meant by the self, not the ego that thinks it's in charge, but the totality of your being, including unconscious depths, archetypal patterns, and connection to the collective. The self, through synchronicity, guides the ego toward wholeness, but the ego must cooperate. It must remain conscious, pay attention, interpret honestly, take the necessary risks. Synchronicity offers guidance, but you must walk the path. The transformation is also marked by increased acceptance of mystery. You stop needing to explain everything. You become comfortable with knowing that reality is far stranger than any theory can capture. The universe reveals itself as magical without ceasing to be physical, meaningful without ceasing to be material, alive without violating natural law. Or perhaps natural law is far richer than the reduced version we've been taught. You find yourself less defensive about these experiences. You stop apologizing for noticing synchronicity or dismissing it to appear rational. You recognize that the dominant culture's insistence that coincidences must be meaningless is itself an unproven metaphysical assumption. You're simply being empirical about your own experience. Meaningful coincidences happen, they feel profound, they seem to serve your psychological development. They resist being explained away. But the transformation isn't always peaceful. Integration of synchronistic awareness means accepting that you're not as separate, not as in control, and not as random as you thought. All three realizations can be disturbing. The illusion of separation protected you from feeling too exposed. The illusion of control protected you from the anxiety of uncertainty. The illusion of randomness protected you from the responsibility of living meaningfully. Synchronicity dissolves all three illusions and asks you to live in the uncomfortable truth they were hiding. Yet there's profound liberation in this. You're freed from the exhausting burden of trying to control everything through ego effort alone. You're released from the despair of believing existence is meaningless. You discover that you're held, guided, in conversation with reality itself, and that your particular life, with all its struggles and imperfections, is meaningful precisely as it is a unique expression of the self's journey toward wholeness. Remember that phone call at the beginning, the friend you were thinking about who texted at that exact moment. You probably dismissed it then, as most of us do, as random chance. But what if it wasn't? What if that small moment was reality speaking its native language, reminding you that you're more connected, more held, more guided than you've been taught to believe? Synchronicity doesn't require you to abandon rationality or embrace superstition. It asks only that you remain open to your own experience, that you notice when meaning appears, that you consider the possibility that the universe is stranger and more alive than the mechanistic world you allows. It invites you into a different relationship with reality, one of participation rather than mere observation, dialogue rather than monologue, meaning rather than mechanism. Your life is trying to tell you something. It's been trying all along. Through the coincidences you've dismissed, the patterns you've rationalized away, the moments when inner and outer worlds aligned with impossible elegance. These aren't glitches in a random system. They're the universe's way of confirming that you're seen, that your journey matters, that the path toward your authentic self is supported by reality itself. The invitation remains open to live more consciously, to notice more carefully, to interpret more honestly, to trust that the meaningful coincidences clustering around your life's transitions and turning points might be exactly what they feel like, communications from the deeper intelligence that's been guiding you all along, waiting for you to recognize its presence, ready to work with you as you become who you've always been meant to be. The question isn't whether synchronicity is real. The question is whether you're awake enough to notice it, humble enough to receive it, and courageous enough to let it guide you toward the wholeness that's your birthright and your calling. Your path is waiting, and reality itself is speaking.